All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the absolute most devastating conflicts in human history, the Punic Wars. But we're not just going to look at dates on a timeline. I want you to step into the sandals of a Carthaginian soldier with me. Picture this. You and I were standing high up on the massive stone walls of Carthage. We're looking out at that gorgeous, shimmering blue Mediterranean Sea. But we're not enjoying the view. No, there's this heavy, creeping dread just sitting in the pit of our stomachs, because right across that water, a shadow is growing. A rising power is sharpening its sword, and that power is Rome.
The sea was quiet. Honestly, almost too quiet. And that perfectly captures the vibe in 264 BC. That was when the very first clash kicked off over the tiny neighboring island of Sicily. But here's the thing we knew, even back then. Small sparks, they can burn down entire worlds. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill border dispute or some squabble over trade routes. No, this was the terrifying, undeniable beginning of a desperate fight for our very survival.
So Section 1, the threat across the water.
Let's set the stage a bit here. For generations, Carthaginians were the undisputed rulers of the waves, period. Our navy was unmatched, our wealth was staggering, and the sea was basically our backyard. We were the masters of the sea, right? Our ships were these incredible engineering marvels, slicing through the ocean waves like freshly sharpened knives. But on the other side, you've got Rome. Stubborn, insanely disciplined, and just relentless. But they were land fighters. They literally had zero navy to speak of. So what do? They do the unthinkable. In this terrifying display of adaptability, they just build a navy from absolute scratch. I mean, in a matter of months, entire forests vanished to build their ship hulls. Ordinary dirt farmers suddenly became sailors, and foot soldiers became marines. It was wild. Now, Rome totally knew they couldn't outsail us, so they came up with this brutal, frankly terrifying secret weapon. They called it the corvus. In really simple terms, think of it as a heavy wooden boarding bridge, but with a massive, nasty iron spike right at the end of it. Normally, our sleek ships would pull up and ram the enemy, right? But instead, when we got close, the Romans would just drop this massive bridge right onto our deck. Wham! That iron spike would bite deep into our wood, physically locking the two ships together. And just like that, they turned sea battles into land fights. Just imagine the absolute visceral terror of that first bloody clash on the water. Wood is shattering everywhere, men are screaming, and that pristine blue ocean literally turns red. For us, watching from the docks of Carthage, this deep, paralyzing fear just took root. We realized with absolute horror that this invention meant Rome could win on the water using the exact same brutal, close-quarters tactics they always used on land. They literally found a cheat code to beat us at our own game. Moving into Section 2, a boy's vow of hate. Let's jump the timeline forward a bit to 218 BC. The fear in our city had definitely grown, but hey, so had our resolve. I want to share this deeply personal story from our history. It's a memory of a young Carthaginian boy standing at an altar right in front of his battle-hardened father. His dad puts his heavy hand on his shoulder and demands, "Swear you will hate Rome forever." And that kid, he swore the blood oath without a single second of hesitation. That boy grew up to be our greatest hope, the absolute legend, Hannibal Barca. And Hannibal was about to lead an army unlike anything the world had ever seen. Hannibal didn't just attack Rome. He did the literal impossible. Step 1, he gathers this massive force. Infantry, cavalry, and yes, those massive, utterly terrifying war elephants. Step 2, instead of taking the easy, predictable sea route, he marches them directly over the jagged, freezing peaks of the Alps. Step 3, he descends into a completely unprepared Italy. Honestly, the sheer brutality of this march is hard to wrap your head around. Back home, we're hearing these horrific stories of men freezing to death in the snow, horses tumbling down ravines, and our incredible war elephants literally slipping off icy cliffs. But Hannibal, he just kept pushing forward. Which brings us to Section 3, the Nightmare of Cannae. When Hannibal finally made it down into Italy, oh man, he brought hell with him. After a string of crushing victories, the stage was set for the Battle of Cannae. This is where an insanely overconfident Rome marched straight into its absolute worst nightmare. 80,000. Let that number sink in. 80,000 is the immense size of the Roman army that marched out that morning, totally confident they were going to finally crush our general. But by sunset, tens of thousands of those exact same Roman soldiers were lying dead in the dirt. So, how did he pull it off?
Hannibal executed what military historians still call a mathematically perfect strategy. He used a double envelopment tactic. Basically, he let the center of his own line fall back, which completely tricked this massive Roman force into pushing forward into the gap. And then, snap, he brought his flanks around and completely surrounded them. It was an absolute slaughter. He suffocated and destroyed the Roman army, leaving the ground entirely covered in bodies. Rome was trembling. They legitimately thought the end of their republic had arrived.
All right, Section 4, Rome strikes back.
So after Cannae, Rome is on its knees. But Hannibal makes this fatal choice. He decides not to march on the actual city of Rome. And that gave the monster time to breathe. Because Rome refused to die. They were just unrelenting. They adapted, yet again. This brilliant new Roman general rises up, a guy named Scipio Africanus. And Scipio was smart enough to know he couldn't beat Hannibal on Italian soil. So he does something unbelievably bold. He bypasses Hannibal entirely, loads up his army, and sails straight for us. He attacks Carthage itself. All of a sudden, the terror of war is brought directly to our doorsteps, to our families, right up to those very walls we were standing on.
This kicks off Section 5. The final siege begins.
Okay, the year is now 202 BC. The epic showdown at the Battle of Zama is here. Hannibal is forced to drop his Italian campaign and rush back across the sea to defend our city. The fate of empires is literally about to be decided on the sands right outside our gates. Hannibal opens the battle exactly like he always did, a terrifying, earth-shaking charge with his massive war elephants. But Scipio, he was ready. He'd trained his men to simply step aside and open wide lanes in their formations. So the elephants, just naturally taking the path of least resistance, charged straight through these empty gaps harmlessly, and the Romans just dealt with them in the backlines. Without the shock and awe of the elephants, the infantry clashed. Steel rang out, thousands of men fell, and tragically, for the first time, Hannibal was decisively beaten. Carthage lost, and Rome became the undisputed master of the Mediterranean.
And now, the heartbreaking end. Section 6, the fall of Carthage. Look, we surrendered our empire, our navy, our wealth, all of it, just to survive. But Rome was never, ever going to be satisfied with us just bowing down. For over a century, that creeping dread we felt on the walls had haunted us. From those first clashes over Sicily in 264 BC, through Hannibal's legendary but costly march, to that bitter defeat at Zama, it was all building to this. The grim, downright apocalyptic reality of 146 BC. The catastrophic final siege of our home. The Roman monster came back to our shores, and this time, they didn't bring a treaty. They came for total, absolute annihilation. I really want you to try and feel the sensory horror of those final days. Screams filled the air, sure, but it was so much worse than just the noise. When the Roman army finally breached our last defenses, the fighting was block by block, house by house, for days. There was this thick, choking smoke just filling our lungs, blinding our eyes. And underneath it all, the sheer, paralyzing terror of knowing there was literally nowhere left to run. Flames devour everything. I mean, imagine standing there as a despairing Carthaginian soldier. You're bleeding, you're exhausted to your bones, and you're just forced to watch the beautiful city you grew up in, the temples you worshipped at, the very homes of your family, all of it completely consumed by this unrelenting, unnatural Roman fire. And it just burned for days and days. And then you're hit with the tragic finality of it all. The city was wiped off the map entirely. The survivors sold into slavery. Our magnificent buildings were pulled down right to their foundations. An entire civilization, with centuries of art, culture, and incredible power, just erased from existence by a force we simply couldn't stop. Which leaves us with a pretty haunting question. What happens when an entire civilization is wiped off the map? It is a staggering loss to even try to process. See, the story of Carthage isn't just about cool military tactics or some ancient rivalry. It's a terrifying lesson about the brutal totality of power and how terrifyingly fast the magnificent can just become dust in the wind. I hope this explainer gave you a visceral sense of what it meant to stand on those walls and watch history burn. Keep exploring, keep asking the big questions, and I'll see you in the next one.